2Samuel chapter 23, if you will, and verse 8 is where we'll start. As always, I want to thank all the elders for preaching when I'm out, and especially last week with some surprise challenges that we faced in the last 14 days. I'm especially grateful for Tim preaching last week in the first part of 2Samuel 23. We're going to pick up at verse 8. Would you please open your Bibles or look on your phones and follow along with me as I read? These are the names of the mighty men whom David had. Josheb-Basshebeth, a Tehachamonite. He was chief of the three. He wielded his spear against 800 whom he killed at one time. And next to him among the three mighty men was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, son of Ahohai. He was with David when they defied the Philistines who were gathered there for battle, and the men of Israel withdrew. He rose up and struck down the Philistines until his hand was weary and his hand clung to the sword. And the Lord brought about a great victory that day. The men returned after him only to strip the slain. And next to him was Shammah, the son of Agi, the Hararite. The Philistines gathered together at Lahai, where there was a plot of ground full of lentils. The men fled from the Philistines. But he took his stand in the midst of the plot and defended it and struck down the Philistines. And the Lord worked a great victory. And 3 of the 30 chief men went down and came about harvest time to David at the cave of Adullam, when a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then at Bethlehem. And David said longingly, "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate." Then the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate and carried and brought it to David. But he would not drink of it. He poured it out to the Lord and said, "Far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Shall I drink the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives?" Therefore he would not drink it. These things the 3 mighty men did. Now Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief of the 30, and he wielded his spear against 300 men and killed them, and won a name beside the 3. He was the most renowned of the 30 and became their commander, but he did not attain to the 3. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was a valiant man of Kabzeel, a doer of great deeds. He struck down 2 Ariels of Moab. He also went down and struck down a lion in a pit on a day when snow had fallen. And he struck down an Egyptian, a handsome man. The Egyptian had a spear in his hands, but Benaiah went down to him with a staff and snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. These things did Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and won a name beside the 3 mighty men. He was renowned among the 30, but he did not attain to the 3. And David set him over his bodyguard. Asahel, the brother of Joab, was one of the 30. Elhanan, the son of Dodo of Bethlehem. Shammah of Herod, Elika of Herod. Helez the Paltite, Ira the son of Ikesh of Tekoa, Abiezer of Anathoth, Mebunani the Hushathite, Zalman the Ahohite, Maharai of Netophah, Heleb the son of Baana of Netophah, Ittai the son of Ribai of Gibeah of the people of Benjamin, Benaiah of Pirathon, Hiddai of the brooks of Gash, Abialban the Arbathite, Asmaveth of Bahurim, Eliabah the Shaalbanite, the sons of Jashan, Jonathan, Shammah the Hararite, Ahiam the son of Sharar the Hararite, Eliphet the son of Ashabai of Maacah, Eliam the son of Ahithophel of Gilo, Hezro of Carmel, Parai the Arbite, Igal the son of Nathan of Zobah, Bani the Gadite, Zelek the Ammonite, Naharai of Beeroth, the armor-bearer of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, Ira the Ithrite, Gareb the Ithrite, and Uriah the Hittite. 37 in all. Church, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And thank you for all of you who were praying for me in that last portion. Whew. I wonder if this passage might feel like deja vu to you this morning. Heard in a podcast this past week what actually causes deja vu, by the way. Do you know? Deja vu is when your brain accidentally stores what should be in short-term memory into your long-term memory. So as that file or that memory is being stored away at the same time that you experience it, it feels familiar. We call it deja vu. Pretty neat. What does that have to do with 2 Samuel today? Well, we're coming back around on the chiastic structure of the end of 2 Samuel. We started in chapter 21 with a story about David dealing with God's wrath. Then in 21, the second part, we talked about David's strength. And then we moved to that central message of the chiasm that the compiler is leading us towards in David's hope in chapter 22 and then in the beginning of chapter 23. So now everything is being mirrored and we're coming back around to the last two messages in 2 Samuel. That theme of hope in the central message about the kingdom of David rested in the promise of God. And therein last week we saw the last official words of King David in chapter 23. And before that we saw Psalm 18, which was included as David showed his trust in the Lord as his rock. Now today you might feel like you're having deja vu because we've already seen a list of David's mighty men earlier in chapter 21. It was there just before we focused on the hope of the kingdom in 2 Samuel 22. There we saw the strength of David's kingdom, and we're seeing it again this morning. So, the compiler of these stories wants us, again, to focus in on the strength of David's kingdom. So what was the strength of David's kingdom? Most visibly, it was these mighty men. The men that won the victories, protected the nation, and kept, in one sense, God's promise and the hope of the nation alive. In verse 8, we see there was a group called the 3. Then in verse 13, we see a group called the 30. The idea is that the 30 are David's best of the best, and that the 3 are the best of the best of the best. So let's look at the 3 first, then we'll look at the 30. But we need to ask why all of this matters. We want to see in this passage that great strength and mighty deeds are best recognized with reverence to God and for the purposes of God. It's an outline on the PowerPoint, and it's in your bulletin if you'd like to follow along with where we are. Let's start with the 3, or the best of the best. Does anybody still use speed dial? Do you remember that? I feel like it's been a good while since that's been a thing. I mean, now essentially you just look at your phone and you just say, call whoever. But I thought about these 3 mighty men as sort of David's speed dial. These were the guys that he relied on. They were the best of the best. If you wanted to get something done, particularly militarily, these were the guys to go to. The ones you call on when you need help. The ones you list first when you think about the people you can count on. Your speed dial guys. Now, Josheb-Bashebesh was the chief of the 3. Did you notice him in the first place here? He killed 800 men in one battle. He killed 800 men. This is one of those passages, by the way, especially when you come to the end and you have a list, that when you're doing your devotionals, you go, check, done. Hope I'm reading something in the New Testament today, right? We ought to linger for just a moment. We're not going to take a lot of time because we'd be here forever. Linger for a moment on the achievements of these guys. Josheb-Bashebesh was the chief of the 3. He was David's favorite in a sense here. And he killed 800 men in one battle. How long do you even think that takes? I feel like that could take days, right? And also, how do you count that, right? I mean, this is another great place for a Lord of the Rings reference, right? Gimli and Legolas are going around counting all the orcs that they're slaying, right? That's what Josheb-Bashebesh had to be doing. Last Lord of the Rings reference. But then we get the second guy, and that's Eleazar. Eleazar had a better name than his father, and I heard somebody laughing at Dodo. How cruel. How cruel to laugh at him, but how cruel to name your son Dodo. And Eliezer, I mean, that's a pretty old-time name anyway, but it's a lot better than Dodo. More importantly, we see that he stood defiantly with David against the Philistines. He fought until he couldn't even let go of his sword anymore. It was like his sword had become a part of him. And that's kind of the idea, not to go too far into, sword play and all that kind of stuff, but the idea of a sword and wielding it is to accomplish what you can't reach, to accomplish a goal that you can't reach, to kind of have something that is an extension of yourself, accomplishing your will. And this guy Eliezer was such a warrior that he couldn't even physically let go of his sword. You kind of imagine him coming in from the battle and they go, "Hey, Eliezer, you can drop your sword off." And he goes, "Yeah, okay, I guess I'll just hold on to it." He endured with his king. Josheb faced and overcame incredible odds. And then we come to number 3, Shammah. Now here's an interesting battlefield. A plot of ground full of lentils. Lentils don't seem too significant to us when we can buy them in a can on the grocery store aisle. But Shammah's story here represents his protection of Israel's resources. He protected the nourishment of his people. So those are the best of the best. And in one sense, they could be their own sermon. Josheb-Basshebeth shows us about overcoming incredible odds. Eliezer shows us about enduring to the end with his king. And Shammah shows us the importance of caring for the needs of others. They were men who were brave, men who didn't give up. They were men who fought for others' sakes and not their own. They were the kind of men that you build thriving societies off of, right? But there were even more of them. See, the separation between the 3 and the 30 isn't to say these guys were great and the rest of these guys were just okay. They made it into the Bible, even though their stories didn't make it into the Bible. We know their names because they are significant too. But after these 3, and before we get to the long list at the end, we have an incredible story that really forms the main section of our passage this morning. Now, we don't know if this includes the 3 that we just looked at, or if it was just some 3 of the 30. It's kind of ambiguous. At the end of the story, it sounds like we were talking about the 3 guys we just mentioned, but at the beginning of the story, it's not entirely clear. That really doesn't matter so much. What matters is what happened when David was in the cave of Adullam. Now, this is great because at the end of the book here, we're being reminded of a place from way closer to the beginning of David's story. Do you remember the cave of Adullam? This was David's hideout, his wet, cold, stinky cave, where in 1 Samuel 22, verse 2, we see everyone who was in distress and everyone who was in debt and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to David at the cave of Adullam. So the atmosphere of the stinky, wet, cold cave is on theme with the people that gather around the king. All those men who couldn't find a leader in Saul on his throne found a leader in David in the stinky, cold cave of Adullam. Well, this would have taken place at a later time than we have here, probably towards the beginning of David's rule over Israel. But we see Saul is definitely past at this point. The Philistines were still not taken care of. So while the 3 came near to David, they heard him say something. No, as you read the story, I imagine that you can already assume that when David says this, he's not looking at all of his men going, "Who's going to do this?" We might even add, in one sense, not that we should add to the Bible, but we can add as we're understanding, add to our understanding that he said this in passing. "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate." Again, David isn't actually asking someone to get that water for him. It would be incredibly dangerous going behind enemy lines after taking a 15-mile hike from Adullam to Bethlehem at the gate. And remember, this is at the gate. This isn't necessarily a place you can sneak by. It would be incredibly dangerous. It would be incredibly selfish of David to ask someone to do this. And yet, verse 16, you just gotta love these guys. The three mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate. They carried it and brought it to David. Wow. These are some guys, right? These are some friends for one thing. What are they displaying to David in this great deed? But their deep loyalty. And David has something of a surprising response, doesn't he, in verse 17? But he would not drink of it. Jerk. Did you see what we just did? We just went over you're not going to drink the water? This is what you wanted. Okay. That's not what he's about here. Look very carefully, verse 17. David said, but he would not drink it. So it's the end of verse 16. He poured it out to the Lord. And David said, far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Shall I drink the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives? Now we know this is not literal blood that they put in there. He's being metaphorical, isn't he? He's saying this isn't just water. This is essentially the blood of those men who heard the desire of my heart and took it as their duty to fulfill it. He said, I can't drink this. Therefore, he would not drink it. These things the three mighty men did. Of course, what these three did was an incredible display of loyalty, wasn't it? They have incredible devotion to their King David. That's not a bad thing to have. And it wasn't even a bad thing to do. David was God's chosen king, after all, wasn't he? He was their leader. And yet in David's response, we might at first glance see more of a child asking for a peanut butter sandwich and then immediately throwing it on the ground after his mother brings it to him. At second glance, it may seem like some kind of shallow act of spirituality, right? Oh, thank you. This is just what I needed. I'm very spiritual after all. This is for the Lord, right? Jesus condemned the Pharisees for such an attitude of teaching people that the things that they had, that they were meant to care for their parents with, if you're saying, you Pharisees, that they can donate that to God, donate it to the temple, and it's more spiritual than caring for your people. This is not what David is doing here either. It takes, in one sense, a third look for us to see deeply what David is doing. Because it is actually a far greater honor than drinking the water he received. David is the chosen king of Israel. He is their leader. He is their beloved general. People loved David. But David couldn't drink the water from Bethlehem because he was unworthy of it. He couldn't even drink it in order to honor or recognize that great strength and the mighty deeds of his men. No, David shows us our big idea from this passage. Great strength and mighty deeds are best recognized with reverence to God and in acknowledging his purposes. And so that's the second point he makes by pouring out the water. The first one being, I'm not worthy of this. The second point being, God is. God sees your devotion and your loyalty, and he is worthy of that. This is a great moment for David. Go ahead, kill a giant. Go ahead, be the king. Go ahead, do all these things. But there's something incredibly significant in David in the cave, realizing when he could have, and nobody would have faulted him if he would have drank it, right? I mean, if you were there, what would you have done? Would you say, wow, guys, this is really unnecessary. And I got to drink it, right? Because you went it to such great lengths. It would have been fine. But David goes a step further and teaches us this incredibly important principle. We're not best recognizing great strength and mighty deeds in the scope of the world by itself. We recognize it in reverence to who God is. He's not diminishing what the men did. He's redirecting the deed with reverence to God, giving God recognition and glory. And for the purpose of our great God, saving and safeguarding his people. So David poured the water out to the Lord. Now, when we use the strength and abilities that he's given us to do mighty deeds for him, we might actually say, in a sense, from what David does here, that those deeds are refreshing to God. Isn't it your desire, church, to please the God whom you serve, the God that you love, your King, Jesus Christ? Let's move on from the 3 to the honorable mentions, verses 18 through 23. And calling it the honorable mentions kind of sounds like a downgrade, doesn't it? But really, this is what's going on. You have the people who won the prize, they were the 3, and then you got these guys who we could look at in one sense saying, like, somebody said this, I heard just the other day, I won't call anybody out, but second place is the first loser? Yikes. In actuality, in this case, what we're seeing is the writer saying we gotta include not only the 30 in a minute here, but these 2 guys stand out to us. They're the honorable mentions. They're still notable. And it's funny because who does he mention first but Abishai? And we saw him back in 21. He was the one who saved David from a giant, possibly at the last moment. But not only that, we see here that he took out 300 men at one other point. Now, don't let your mind go this direction. We saw at the very beginning, the first of the 3 kill 800 in one battle. Don't immediately think, well, 300 is really not that impressive, right? I mean, I think most of us can't even imagine killing one enemy in a battle. So Abishai is singled out here for a moment as the one who killed 300 other soldiers in one battle. So even though he wasn't one of the 3, he's mentioned twice in these final chapters. And he also gets the title of the commander over the 30. I hope you think of David kind of rolling his eyes when you read about Abishai, though, because Abishai was just like his brother Joab. Do you remember Joab and Abishai, the sons of Zeruiah, whom we see David 2 times say, "What am I going to do with you?" These are the guys who are shoot first, ask questions later. They were the men of action. And that's a good quality, except when you need to consider God's will. Well, that's Abishai. That's the last time we get to see that guy. After Abishai, we get a second honorable mention in Benaiah. Now, 3 of his feats are mentioned, which is kind of cool. The first one, he struck down 2 Ariels. Has anybody ever struck down an Ariel before? I'm not talking about the Little Mermaid, right? Yeah? Yeah? What is an Ariel? Oh, okay. I don't think that's it. I'm going to go out on a limb, pun intended, and say it wasn't a pigeon. You're welcome. He struck down 2 Ariels. What I could come up with was these were either 2 really prominent soldiers or maybe 2 military units. That's kind of what we have to work with. Definitely not pigeons, though, Josh. Thank you for that. That's good. If that doesn't seem that impressive, he also killed a lion that he found in a pit on a snowy day. Yeah, I know. Now, it's not easy to kill a lion for one thing, but it's also not common to have snow. So this is like a very strange day that they're like, we've got to mention our snow day when Benaiah killed a lion. So they put that in there too. And then lastly, we see that he killed an Egyptian with his own spear. An Egyptian that we don't get, he had to be some kind of notable Egyptian. I mean, it says that he was handsome. And that's something that we attach to Saul and Absalom and even David. That handsomeness probably goes along with a great strength. And Benaiah took him out with his own spear. So he was promoted to David's head of the bodyguard. Now, something we see from both the best of the best, the 3, and the honorable mentions is an essential truth about God's work among his people. Of course, we need to differentiate David as God's chosen king, the one God would use to establish a throne forever, the recipient of God's promise. But that doesn't mean that it was only when David was around that great deeds could be done by the Lord. And one of the reasons we need to remember this is because when it rains, it pours. Life is like playing whack-a-mole sometimes, isn't it? You know exactly what I mean before I even explain that parable. The parable of the whack-a-mole life. Just think about it. In David's own life, Goliath was a problem, so he whacked him. Then Saul became a problem. Then the Philistines became a problem. Then Saul's remaining house. Then Absalom, David's son. Abishai has already shown us that David needed help when he killed the giant who almost killed David. And Benaiah's deeds had to do with Moab and Egypt. Those are two nations that we didn't really hear too much about throughout this story. And yet they were a problem too. When it rains, it pours. When there are problems, there are always more problems. That's the only real promise we have about the problems in this life. Remember, Jesus said, you will have trouble in this life, but take heart, I have overcome the world. These men show us that there are other issues besides what David is dealing with, and God is in the midst of all of them. And this is important for us because it's so easy in our Christian lives to say, I'm just part of this small town, this small church, this small job, this small that. But you face real trials and problems in your life, and God is in the midst of them. You're not David. I'm not David. We're maybe more like Abishai, or more like Benaiah, or more like some of these others that are listed here, but there are challenges that God has appointed you to face. And we need to face them with his strength. So if we're recognizing great strength and mighty deeds in a way that's reverential to God or honors him and according to his purposes, we have to see that the corner of life we live in will have unique challenges and that the Lord has put them in front of us. This is one of the best things about believing that God is sovereign over all things. If he is really in control and sovereign, rules over everything, then any problem you face is one he's set in front of you. Why was that lion in the pit on the snowy day? Because God said, guess what, Benaiah? Today you're killing a lion. Pretty awesome, actually, when you think about it. Abishai, Benaiah, and the others needed to be ready for surprise challenges in their lives. Lions in snow, Egyptians with spears, whatever an aerial is, not a pigeon. Every generation of God's people face unique challenges in culture and even inside the church. So just like David gathered the 3 and the 30 for his own support, we need to be ready for our unique challenges to face them together because we're a part of the body of Christ. When you join the church, you're called to leave behind your own self-sufficiency and to be able and willing to say, I need some help, and recognize that God meets our needs through Christ in his body. That is you and me and all believers everywhere for all time. These men listed in our passage today were notable in their great deeds because their loyalty to their king stood out more than anything else. So they were ready to face the challenges. They weren't of the attitude of saying, man, there's a lion outside. I don't know what to do about this, and it's snowing. I don't want to go out there. No, they said, this is what God has for me. I am a soldier in his kingdom. I have a great king. What will David think when he hears that I killed a lion? Or more importantly, what will he hear when he finds out that I ran away from it and didn't want to deal with it? When I just sat and complained? No, they were notable in their deeds because their loyalty to their king stood out more than anything else. And that's likewise what unites us to face anything in this life by God's strength. We're united by our devotion to Christ. Not that our devotion is anything to write home about. That's not our message. Come see how devoted to Christ we are. No, see how Christ is so devoted to us and has so won us over and made us his by the cross, by the resurrection, by the new life that we now have in him. And so we can move forward together. Last thing, let's look at this mighty list. I know you're thinking 24 to 39. This is a large chunk. I'm going to do a great injustice to all these names right now. But we have this mighty list to end our passage. And though not everyone could be a part of the 3, to be named among the 30 was an enormous recognition. I want to point out 2 things from this list from verses 24 to 39. The first is very positive. David had a great number of reliable and heroic men to count on. We need to read this list with an appreciation for how David recognized them. At some point, David said, I don't know if David was talking to the writer of 2 Samuel or not, but at some point he said there has to be a list. And you need to keep this list because there are men who have done great things for the kingdom and we want to be remembering them. So he made this list. The list serves to remind Israel that God has raised up mighty men to fight for the king he's chosen. They're here, this list is here to remind us of God's faithfulness, that he won't leave us alone. We might not have giant killers and lion slayers among us, but we are, as the author of Hebrews says, surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. It's important for us to be reminded of our own list of brothers and sisters, especially those who join with us for worship on the Lord's Day. Maybe that's a great plug for the church calendar. It's a list with all the people that are a part of your church family that you can pray for. Because snowy days and lion days are ahead of us, no doubt. That's all a very good takeaway from this, but as we read this very long list of very obscure names, we have to look at the very end. Did you notice who was listed last? It's good old Uriah, the Hittite. And I mean good old Uriah, faithful Uriah, loyal Uriah, devoted Uriah, Uriah who loved David and answered all of his commands without question, even when his command was to go to the front lines by himself. You're a mighty man after all. All these other guys who've killed 800 and 300 by themselves, this is nothing for you, Uriah. And yet on that day when Joab gave the command on behalf of David for Uriah to go to the front lines and then for all the men to step back so that Uriah would fall in battle, this is the story we have about this guy. It's a tragic one because you'll remember Uriah was Bathsheba's husband. The one, Bathsheba, whom David saw and wanted and took for himself, and then later found to be pregnant. David needed to cover his sin. And so this mighty list ends with the name of a hero in Israel who also reminded us sadly of David's greatest failure. This list of the strength of Israel ends with a reminder of David's weakness. The best of men is still a man at best, Spurgeon put it. We saw one of David's better moments today, pouring out the cup. I'm not worthy to drink what is essentially the blood of these men who risked their lives to refresh me. But we're also reminded in this passage of his worst moment, his unfaithfulness to his loyal and mighty men. A time when David did take what wasn't his, that he took the cup that didn't belong to him and drank it till it was empty. David's kingdom was filled with mighty men, but it was still in desperate need of a greater king. Great strength and mighty deeds are best recognized with reverence to God and for his purposes. Of course, when we veer off of that course, we reveal the weakness of our own sinfulness. Remember, David longed for that water in the cave of Adullam. He wanted that cup of water from Bethlehem, 15 miles into enemy territory, but ultimately he pours it out to the Lord. But Uriah reminds us of another occasion when he took Bathsheba and sent Uriah to his death, taking the drink for himself, sent his men back to their death for another cup, so to speak. If we don't recognize great strength and mighty deeds with reverence to God and giving him glory, and if we don't recognize them in light of God's purposes, then we're taking the honor to ourselves and serving ourselves a cup of water for our own purposes. This is how all of this meets us today, because we're not kings, we're not mighty men of war, but we are God's people. We're meant to be living together before the Lord and by his strength, not our own. We can see that the value of these mighty men rests in their loyalty to their king and their service to his people. And that's where we are too. We've been enlisted to follow a greater king than David. Our Lord Jesus Christ has triumphed over sin and death for us. He's overcome all the temptation that we face day to day. And he has enlisted us to his army. You know, there's a point where Jesus sends out his disciples and they go out and they're casting out demons and they're healing the sick. And they come back to Jesus and they say, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And Jesus says, yeah, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I don't know if Jesus ever used the word awesome, but that's kind of the vibe of that passage. Good work, but don't rejoice in this. Rejoice that your names are written where? The book of life. None of our names are in the end of chapter 23. But if you're in Christ, he, by his death and resurrection on the cross, paying for your sin entirely of his own work and not your doing, has added your name to a far greater list than what we read here today. Not because we've done greater things than these men, but because we follow the one who has done the greatest deed, who has died in our place. He's gone on our behalf behind enemy lines. He's poured out his own blood for us, not just putting his life at risk, but laying it down willingly. Loved ones, we need to be cautious of the times we might raise a glass to our own great strength and mighty deeds. Jesus will call us to do things in his kingdom, but they're meant to be in reverence to him and in light of his purposes, not our own. So how do I know if I'm honoring Christ with what I do? Here's a question. Are you content to not be recognized for it? To do it in secret? Our King lived a life of perfect obedience to his Father, and in the end, he faced the Father's full wrath for the sins of his people. Are you willing not only to do what God calls you to do in secret, but are you willing to bring on more trouble in your life for having obeyed Christ? Because that's what his ultimate perfect obedience led him to. Greater trouble in this world that put him on the cross. Does the gospel compel you to spend your strength in pursuing mighty deeds for Christ? That's good. But does the gospel compel you to lay down your life, to accept the unexpected challenges that don't seem so spiritually impressive, to live the everyday of the Christian life, suffering well, mourning well, being sick well, doing the job every day with thankfulness in your hearts, that wherever you are, that's where the Lord intends for you to honor him. Our King poured out his life as a sacrifice to his Father to enlist us into his version of the 30. He calls it the church. Are you willing to pour your life out now, wherever he has you? He's worthy of that reverence, and his purpose is glorious, saving and safeguarding his people for his glory. Well, we're going to respond to God's word this morning by coming to the table of communion. So I'm going to invite the elders to come up, and we will prepare the elements for you, and we'll invite you to come up whenever you're ready. We're going to read from the Gospel of Matthew once everyone's been served. I know you've already taken time this morning to examine your hearts, but perhaps it would be worthwhile for you to pause yet again. Maybe something from this passage revealed a need that you have before the Lord. Maybe to confess self-centeredness or apathy towards his glory and purposes. Don't let any shame stop you from confessing to your Father. Receive his forgiveness this morning. Please come up to receive the elements when you're ready. And once everyone's been served, we'll read together and partake together.